saluto cordialissimo a tutti.
We welcome you all, the bishops, the minister, the delegates from the European Bishops' Conferences, and the members of the various WHO offices in Europe. And welcome to you all. Welcome to people joining us online. Welcome to this Who is My Neighbor Today conference, the presentation of the second WHO report on health equity status in Europe. Today's agenda, the day today started very early because the delegates at 7:30 a.m. Went to the Vatican where Pope Leo XIV welcomed them in a private audience for the group of delegates. But as his talk was meaningful, we don't want to lose that for those of you who were there and those who weren't there. So we will now watch the video of the speech by Pope Leo from earlier today. May the peace be with you all. Eminence, dear brother bishops, ministers, distinguished guests and representatives of European and international institutions, dear brothers and sisters, good morning and welcome. You came here to Rome from different European countries to participate in this gathering, in this event titled Today, Who is My Neighbor? Promoted by the Council of European Bishops' Conferences, the World Health Organization, the Regional Office for Europe, and the Italian Bishops' Conference. Today, the second European report by the WHO on the health equity status will be presented. It is an important report calling the attention on situations lived by many people in Europe, especially by many men and women who are experimenting poverty, loneliness, and isolation in their daily life. Across many countries, health inequalities are growing. Less people can be healed, can be treated by the offered services, and there's a growing, we need to give greater importance to the mental health of people, especially the youth, because the visible injuries of our soul and mind are not less important than those of our body. Health cannot be a luxury for the few, but rather a condition, a needed and necessary condition for social peace. Universal health coverage is not just a technical objective to be achieved and fulfilled, but rather a moral imperative for societies aiming at defining themselves as just and fair. The protection of health needs to be accessible to the most vulnerable because that is required by their dignity, and also to avoid that any injustice becomes a seed for conflicts. So the question that is the focus of this event, taken from the Gospel of Luke, is for us all, not to justify ourselves as the scholar of the law does, but to be questioned deeply. And it is a question which is always relevant, with no single answer, but asks each and every one of us to reply in a specific and unique way. Therefore, we can ask ourselves, for me, right now, in this very moment of my life, who is my neighbor? In the different situations that we are living, the answers can be very different. However, the invitation to go towards the other is not different, especially to go towards those who are suffering. In the book of Genesis, we find a similar question. Lord told Cain, "Where's Abel? Where's your brother?" And he said, "I do not know. Am I the keeper of my brother?" In the parable of the Good Samaritan, we find an answer to that. Yes, you are the keeper, the guardian of your brother, because you are called to keep his humanity. St. Augustine stated that our God wanted to call himself our neighbor, and indeed, our Lord Jesus makes us understand that he was the one who helped that person who was lying on the street and who had been abandoned. In the Fratelli Tutti encyclical letter, Pope Francis underlined the role of the people who had attacked that person, and he reminded us that those people usually have as their secret allies those who pass by and turn their eyes the other way. Distance, distraction, and the getting used to the suffering of the other pushes towards indifference. Each and every man and woman, especially Christians, are called to stick their eyes towards those who are suffering, to the pain of lonely people, and to those who are marginalized and considered as waste, because without them we cannot create just and fair societies. It would be an illusion to think that by neglecting those people, those brothers and sisters, it will be easier to achieve happiness. It's only together that we can bring communities of solidarity that can take care of each other, where welfare and peace are developed to the benefit of everyone. Healing humanity and others helps us live our own humanity. Dear brothers and sisters, the Church has a public role that is not fulfilled in its support or educational activities. It's always in the service of promoting humankind and universal fraternity. Churches in Europe and across the world, in collaboration with international organizations, can, even today, can perform an important service in fighting health inequalities in favor of most vulnerable populations. Therefore, I renew my wish, my exhortation, so that in our Christian lifestyle, this dimension of fraternity is never missing. This dimension that has inclusion, courage, solidarity, and that is deeply rooted in our union with God and in our faith in Jesus Christ. Dear brothers and sisters, thanks for what you are doing, and I entrust you to the maternity of Mary, and I bless you, your families, and your service. Thank you. The speech by the Pope is a summary of our commitments and of what we said earlier today and what we will reiterate this afternoon. I want to underline this phrase from the text. Only by working together we will be able to create communities where welfare, peace are developed to the benefit of everyone. And that is the meaning of this event that gathers the Italian Bishops' Conference, the Council of European Bishop Conferences, the WHO, the President of National Federations, and councils of healthcare professionals. So a group of experts that represent Italian and European healthcare systems. So we thank the Holy Father for his speech. After the audience, the delegates went to the main office of the Italian Bishops' Conference, where they attended the Holy Mass, and then they had an initial discussion with the Secretary General of the Italian Bishops' Conference, Baturi, Cardinal Zuppi, the President of the Italian Bishops' Conference, Dr. Kluge, who will also be speaking later today, this afternoon. Now let's continue with this afternoon's agenda with the scientific session opened to all the participants. How are certain initiatives created? Well, this actually stems from a chance that was also the occasion to create a synergy between institutions, and that was also brought forward for a long time. And we've already seen a strong connection in this very hall over the past years, thanks to the willingness to collaborate by Dr. Chris Brown. Over the past 2 years, we hosted 3 days to prepare the recent Jubilee, 3 days organized by the Federations of National Council of Italian Healthcare Professionals. And these days, those events shared this common sensitivity and strengthened the collaboration between the Italian Bishops' Conference and the National Office for Pastoral Healthcare Professionals, and the European offices of the WHO. The first on the 10th of May in Verona on health poverties, with the intervention by Dr. Brown, and in this very room on the 22nd November 2024 on the sustainability of health systems in Europe with Dr. Brown and with Dr. Joseph Figueras. On the 5th of April here in this very main hall in 2025, the conference titled Many Words, One Health with Dr. Natasha Muscat. And today this collaboration is even stronger with the presentation of the second European report on the status of health equity in Europe, drafted by the WHO. So let's dive into today's work, and we will start with a short biblical lectio on one of the most important, most popular parables of the gospel, offered by Stefano Waran, a biblical scholar who studied at the Franciscan Biblical Center in Jerusalem. He's professor of the Holy Bible at several institutions in Italy and abroad, and he's very happy to share his thoughts with us, as it's also his birthday. So we thank him for being here. Who's my neighbor? How many times have we listened to this parable? How many times have we heard the question posed to Jesus by the scholar of the law? The law of the neighbor prescribed by Moses required an explanation to understand who the intended recipient was, and instead of directing love toward the wrong person. So who's my neighbor? Why are you asking this question, scholar of the law? You who have studied Moses since your youth, you who surely taught others the law that is contained in the book of the Leviticus. But yet we also need to keep asking this question, because after 2,000 years after the preaching of the gospel, we still need to give an answer. Jesus does not lose his patience with the scholar of the law, but he accompanies him into a narration where an answer can emerge. And luckily, Jesus does not lose his patience with us either. He takes us by the hand and helps us understand to the question that we have also asked. The story of the Good Samaritan, as told by Luke, is not just an example, but it is a genuine journey of growth. And the scholar of the law, in the end, is challenged by Jesus to draw his own conclusions. And this Jesus is really wonderful because he does not deliver explanations or takes the place of the man in providing answer. He's not paternalistic, but he educates in the very sense of such word. He draws out, he extracts the answer from his interlocutor, and in this way he makes him grow and makes him more responsible. So what we can read in this gospel is a small journey of discernment, so that the word may not only reach the head, but also the heart, and is not only the execution of a command, but the fruit of an inner conviction. So this is what the prophets also did. For instance, think of Nathan, which led the king to repentance. The word of God reached him to open his eyes to the evil that he was committing. And here we have a scholar of the law, not a powerful person. But we are all powerful. We all have the power of being good or evil, of spreading love or resentment, and practicing forgiveness or revenge. We are asking for peace in these difficult times. But if peace is just a destination for us, we may never see that translated into practice. However, if we consider that as a point of departure, we realize that it is us that can build peace through our choices. And either we understand that, or the peace will always be tomorrow. And earlier today, as we just heard from Pope Leo, he connected healthcare to peace. So let us walk alongside the scholar of the law so that we can also answer the question, who's my neighbor today? To guide us toward an answer, Jesus dismantles certain patterns that seem to be consolidated. Let us always remember that the priest and the Levite are applying the law of Moses. The man who fell among robbers, who was half dead. So there was the risk of breaching the precept of the book of Numbers. Ezekiel, in his vision of the future ideal temple, had specified this norm explicitly for priests who had to guarantee a legitimate cult to the people of God. And it is for the good of the people of God that the priest and the Levite do not touch the man in the parable, because they had to think of a greater good of their role for the benefit of all, because they had to sacrifice animals for the purification of everyone. And therefore they sacrificed a man who was asking for an immediate good, the good of life itself. The Samaritan, on the other hand, has nothing to defend. He has not public roles, and he's regarded as someone who's stranger to the law of Moses. He can become contaminated because he's already contaminated. He has nothing to lose, and therefore he doesn't lose his humanity either. He has compassion, something is moving inside him, and it is the same verb used for the encounters between Jesus and the suffering people, such as the widow of Nain, who lost his son. And in the same way, the merciful love of Father of the prodigal son is described. And it is not a casual verb. In the Old Testament, the love of God was described as the love of a mother, as though God had a womb that filled with love for the people he created. The Samaritan has nothing good in the eyes of the law, but he has the very style of God's love. He vibrates with the same love, and just as a mother and a father take care of their child, so the Samaritan takes care of the unfortunate man that he encounters too. And this care is translated into three actions. He treats, transports, and provides lodging to that person. First, the treatment of wounds. He pours oil and wine something that was known to Hippocrates and was part of the medical treatments of the time. And that is interesting because that is not improvised. It is a scientific treatment, at least for what science could know back then. So attention to the sick is not improvised. It is not just the fruit of good intentions, but it is the success of the action for which you're called to apply all your knowledge to achieve efficiency. So the act of being good is not personal gratification or personal justice, but it is it goes towards the other. The other is the center of my love, not my self-interest. So the action needs to be really good. Second action, the transport. The Samaritan gives up on his own comfort to place that unfortunate man in a good position. The priest, the Levite, had not renounced, had not given up on their position. The Samaritan knows that good often takes the shape of a renunciation. He steps aside in an uncomfortable position to favor the other. And third action, lodging at the inn. The Samaritan accompanies the man and pays for the expenses, and he even promises to come back, unlike the priest and the Levite that hadn't stopped even once. And he entrusts the man to people who can take care of him for longer. Pope Francis, in the Fratelli Tutti encyclical letter, saw in this place the various resources that the institutions of an organized and free society can generate. So this place can also be an opportunity to expand and improve the place of the Good Samaritan. So let us return to the initial question. Who is my neighbor? Jesus allowed the scholar of the law to undertake a journey within that question to understand that it is meaningless. So this is why he reverses the question. Which of the three do you think was the neighbor? So it makes no sense to ask who my neighbor is. Every human being is. So the question is, how can I be a neighbor of others? So the one who becomes a neighbor is no indifferent to the other's pain and therefore acts, takes on the burden of the other. And as Pope Francis wrote in the same encyclical letter, with his gestures, the Good Samaritan showed that the existence of each and every one of us is connected to that of others. Life is not just time that passes, but the time of encounter. So after seeing the good that needs to be done, we can no longer look the other way. Our eyes makes us responsible. Becoming aware of reality is a call to act. There is no longer an excuse for ignorance. Otherwise, we become like the Levite or the priest. Looking at reality as we are doing today commits us to follow with actions. The Samaritan, as he passed by that street, becomes the instrument of salvation. And this reversal of our gaze, of vision, shifting from what others can do for me to what I can do for others, is the hard part of this parable. But at the same time, it's the only way we have to shift from a selfish heart to an open vision to the world that surrounds us. Good is created day by day. Peace is not the fruit of agreements, but of a trust that grows. Joy is the result of a life spent on what truly matters. The more we keep for ourselves, the more we'll be dissatisfied, and our life will be a gift of, the more our life will be a gift of love, the more the joy will be the light that guides us and gives meaning to our freedom. So this is what Jesus did first, placing himself not on the side of those who are who serve as Lord, but to be a servant and to take care of others and have this love circulate. Those who experience this love are called to be collaborators of this plan for salvation. Those who experienced the strength and the greatness of this love cannot keep this for themselves. The Good Samaritan is certainly Jesus, but also what each of us is called to become. Because the mission of the master of the teachers can be continued not only in theoretical principles, but also in our concrete and real experience. Go and do likewise. Thank you so much for your attention.
Grazie Don Stefano per le sue parole. Mi piace sottolineare.
Thank you, Father Stefano. I'd like to give echo to an expression you used at the beginning, inner conviction. Without inner conviction, these institutions could not exist. Without that personal decision that touches and impacts on each one of us, and then the opportunity to respond to that fundamental question. I'd also like to underline that in this parable, we are going across borders, which is what we're doing this afternoon. We are represented here by around 30 European nations, and we are skipping over our boundaries and borders in order to be able to serve the European citizens who are waiting a healthcare answer. We now move on to another contribution, and we will see a general picture of healthcare in Europe and the needs of healthcare. One decisive element is that of loneliness, and we have asked for a reflection, and we have asked for Minister Orazio Schillaci to offer us a reflection. He is a nuclear medicine doctor, and he is the president of the Faculty of Medicine and rector of Tor Vergata University and the Minister of Health of the Italian government. Over to you, Mr. Minister. Thank you. Good afternoon. Dear moderator, authorities, illustrious speakers, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, thank you to all those who organized this meeting, particularly the Italian Bishops' Conference, the General Secretary, Archbishop Giuseppe Batturi, and Don Massimo Anginelli, the Director of the National Office for the Pastoral Care of Healthcare in CEI. The topic that I have been asked to speak about, loneliness, is very topical, and it presents social and cultural profiles as well as healthcare ones. We live in a time of deep contradiction. Technology, on the one hand, facilitates connections and abates distances and contrasts inequality. At the same time, it may exacerbate forms of isolation and alienate us from true relationships. When we talk about loneliness, we think about our elderly who are often living alone, whereas they see the disaggregation of their networks that they had built throughout their life, work, the community of reference, and sometimes even family ties dissolve. But these lonelinesses impact our young people as well, who more frequently live out fragile relationship, psychological difficulties. I'm talking about those young people who are imbued by social media, or the okikomori phenomenon, which is widespread in Italy too. Healthcare and mental health care is an emergency of public health care which cannot be procrastinated, which is why we adopted the new plan for mental health with a special focus on young people, where we try to intercept psychological difficulties precociously, and we try to spread a knowledge of mental health which allows us to move away from stigmas and prejudice. And Professor Pisano will illustrate this framework, political idea, which will try to give an answer to the new needs emerging in this context. But the sensation or the feeling or the risk of being abandoned is also for those chronically ill who sometimes are take on the temptation of retreating from social life, or those who have rare diseases, around 2 million Italians who are impacted by pathologies who do not yet have a final cure. There are stories of complex lives marked by solitude, by difficulty to access, diagnose, and cure their disease. These are just some mentions helping us to understand why we talk about lonelinesses in the plural. The scientific international community has proven with great clarity that loneliness is associated to increased risk of depression, anxiety, and cognitive disorders, as well as cardiovascular and functional decline issues and greater mortality. Healthcare does not only depend on the organization of healthcare trusts and by medicines and drugs, but by relational, economic, and social conditions and relationships. The environment where we live, the quality of human relations are social determinants of healthcare. And among this, what is growing is the issue of loneliness or the various instances of loneliness. This might become a factor which deteriorates the quality of life and increases healthcare vulnerability. In a nation such as Italy, where the expectation of life is today beyond 83 years of age and makes us one of the longest living countries in the world, we have seen the necessity to reform our national healthcare service in order to be able to tackle this new demographic and epidemiological as well as social scenario. Greater lifespan, the increase of chronic diseases and disability entail complex and new challenges for the deep implications on the healthcare, social and economic sphere. But there is also a human and relational dimension which is very important, which is the relationship between the increase of age and loneliness. Our policies need to aim at integrating more and more the healthcare dimension with that which is social and community-based. We need to rediscover the vocation of our healthcare system, which is that of taking care of people and not taking care of illnesses. We need to look at needs in their entirety, both social and healthcare-wise. How are we modeling our healthcare in order to take on these challenges so that the most vulnerable are not marginalized? In the last few years, we have seen great interventions in order to strengthen local assistance and to take on board the most fragile so that they don't feel abandoned and neglected in terms of their rights to a cure. The reform of community homes and strengthening of home and proximity medicine instances are important steps towards this goal. The objective is that of building a national healthcare system which is able to be closer to people, able not only to cure, but also to preempt social isolation and accompany citizens at the time of greater fragility. It's not about limiting ourselves to building or refurbishing buildings, but it's about creating a model which is based on the paradigm of taking care of patients. In order to pursue this objective, we need recognizable spaces and places where citizens will be able to find, as well as their health care solutions, an attitude open to responding to their needs. Fragile patients need to find through a one-stop shop subjects which have a holistic gaze on every person and their needs by placing together and composing the offer. For chronic patients, the commitment is that of creating user stories which are more easy to come to fruition of, and we would like to model these around the organizational and clinical needs of these patients. Telemedicine is another new form of relationship between the actors of primary care, allowing us to follow over time our patients so that it's not just an exchange where we ask for something and get an effect. Alongside caring, we need to preempt and intercept needs. We need to identify an adequate need and offering in order to give answers. It's about aligning need, request, and social health care requirements in order to enable access to all this. We were talking about integrated home care. This is a matter of pride for all of us, knowing that today, thanks also to the increase of resources that have been put into action, more than 1.5 million of over 65 are looked after in the home. As far as the over 80s, 250 million have been placed towards telemedicine experimental projects for telemonitoring and teleassistance in order to allow the maintenance of the best life quality at one's own home. These are projects addressed towards the cognitive deterioration, monitoring and avoiding social isolation. Again, for the over 80s, in an experimental manner, we are trying to use instruments of telemedicine for social and health care. services. Alongside the dimension of healthcare, we need to innovate in terms of medical research and scientific research. The medicine is now talking more and more about healthy aging, preemption and early diagnosis, personalized healthcare, and digitalization of the systems can improve the quality of life of the elderly, of the most elderly. Many of these themes have been topical during the Italian presidency of G7, and particularly the event promoted by us in Genova alongside with the Italian Institute of Technology. This was a crucial time of delving in deep, and it has seen the contribution of Chris Brown, who is here among us as well, and the program on the WHO Center in Venice, which is a national point of reference for inequality monitoring and for supporting public policy in order to improve equity in healthcare. There is another form of loneliness which we need to consider. This is the loneliness of the healthcare actors and the social workers. These are men and women who every day guarantee our right to health. These professionals too have to deal with their own loneliness alongside their patients when they find themselves working in greater stress, which might culminate in forms of burnout. And this time we have not been lacking a commitment in order to improve the conditions of work of social and healthcare actors, but not only from a point of view of working, but that of safety and security. I'm talking about the heinous phenomenon of violence against healthcare professionals. There have been nearly they have been in the thousands in 2025, and these were physical and verbal, and these are numbers which must remind us of the fact that we must not lower our guard. We have taken steps in order to safeguard people up to the arrest of the aggressors even after the fact, but we need to promote a culture of respect and trust of those who are taking care of us, and we really need to change gears and change our cultural paradigm. Culture and mutual respect need to continue to inspire the relationships between doctors and patients, and in the same way we need to focus the attention on the humanization of cure. This is a principle which we have placed in our framework. Along this theme, we are defining new organizational protocols because we know very well that care is not just the healthcare action. We can feel alone in a hospital bed, even if we're missing that empathy and that humanity which enable us to improve the care journey of every patient. In an era of technological development, we must never lose the central role of every person and the dignity of every human person. The fact that we are digitizing our public health care does not mean giving up these values which have made it an invaluable asset of the entire nation. But before the challenges represented by solitude, we cannot just answer in terms of medicine and healthcare. We need a collective thrust in order to build communities which are more in solidarity, able to take care of people who are the most fragile. In this sense, the evangelical message recalled in this meeting is a powerful civil metaphor. It means to recognize the other one, the neighbor, not turning the other way when we encounter fragility. Healthcare is this too. It's a responsibility which needs to be shared. In Italy, there is an extraordinary resource, a social resource, which often we take for granted. This is the strength of family networks and that of volunteering. A family still represents today the first place of care and solidarity in many situations of fragility, which are supported every day thanks to the silent dedication of family members and alongside the family, there is a network of associations, organizations, and the third sector volunteering and ecclesial bodies who are irreplaceable in fighting loneliness. These actors represent a fundamental component of social cohesion in our nation. They offer listening, closeness, accompaniment, and often intercept situations of need even before they emerge in those institutional circuits. This is why it is important to promote greater integration in policies, professionals, public and private sectors in the public and private actors in the third sector who animate our national healthcare system. In this direction is also the register of the associations for health, which we have recently set up in order to promote participated healthcare. We have institutionalized the inclusion of the associations of patients in decision-making processes so that they are more oriented towards the often unvoiced needs of the patients. The contribution of institutions and organizations who have a direct experience must and is an added value that deserves being presented and given value to more and more. This is why at times such as today, where there is a space for dialogue and cooperation in public institutions, religious communities and civil society, we really need to foster this and make it grow. We need to work together so that healthcare is not just the absence of a disease, but a synonym of physical, mental and social well-being. Thank you kindly. Thank you, Mr. Minister, for being here and for your kind words. You have not forgotten any age group which might be impacted by loneliness and no level of the population. Thank you also for having reminded us about the possible loneliness of healthcare personnel. We are people who look after people, and as people, we are subject to all the weaknesses of life. Thank you, and we carry on with our talks, and I would like to know, we would like to know at what level of awareness has WHO acquired in Europe. And we ask Dr. Hans-Henrik Kluge, who is a medical and an expert in public health care, both initially in Belgium and then in Europe and beyond. And since 2020, he is the Director General of WHO Europe. He could not have chosen the most difficult time because in Europe and the entire world has gone through a difficult time from a healthcare point of view. And therefore, we ask you to speak to us about health as a bridge to solidarity in Europe and resilience, the role of the World Health Organization. Dr. Kluge, we are listening to you.
Dear religious excellencies, leaders in healthcare, medical doctors, nurses, it's really a great honor for me to be here today and also this morning at the first meeting that we had under the mentorship and the guidance, as you saw, of the Holy Father on pastoral healthcare, in indeed a historical turning point that we are undergoing. Europe is facing what I call a perma-crisis. So it's no longer that we are moving from one crisis to the other, but basically what we have to learn is to navigate what I call permanent disruption. There's economic pressure, social stress, health equities are decreasing, and my colleague Chris Brown will tell something on the latest data a little bit further. But as health leaders, we should never forget that strong public health systems can tackle and contribute a lot to those main challenges. Strong public health systems prevent people from falling through the cracks. Let me give a very concrete example from our work. On a busy street, an elderly woman looks at entering a shop to buy groceries or paying for her medicines. She has to make the choice. A strong public health system with effective health financing means that that elderly lady will not have to choose one or the other. Out-of-pocket payments for healthcare that is unaffordable for 1 million people in Europe, are pushing currently in our pan-European region, 53 member states, between 1% and 14% of households into poverty, meaning they have to make a choice. WHO is supporting countries to strengthen that social protection systems and avoid such a hard choices. For a mum alone, Do I give good education to my children, or will I be able to buy medicines for rare diseases? The good news, my dear friends, is that good health policy saves lives. It means it does not always have to cost a lot of money. If you design your policy, your national health insurance scheme carefully. But you have to measure it first. A very concrete example where many people are falling through the cracks in the European region, but frankly speaking, also globally, is violence against women and girls. I have called it recently a global public health crisis. We are doing much worse than 20 years ago. Can you imagine? 1 out of 3 girls, before they hit the age of 20 years, will have experienced at least one time either intimate partner violence or non-partner sexual or physical violence, a real public health crisis. I have established this as a special initiative. In the beginning, I got a lot of criticism that people were telling, why is the health sector meddling into this? This is a police issue, it's a judicial issue. My dear friends, the health sector, for those survivors, for those women and girls, are not only the first point of contact, but often the only point of contact with public services. So if we as doctors and nurses do not succeed to recognize and capture those battered women and girls, they will have no chance whatsoever for lifelong healing. And here we see a tremendous potential to work together with pastoral services, because ultimately we have the same mission. It is to safeguard the dignity of each single person. In WHO jargon, we call it to leave no one behind. Second point, the Honorable Minister Schillaci touched upon this, is the mental health. We know that loneliness is a killer. Young people feel more and more lonely, but it's the same now for the elderly population. So we have to look through the whole life course. And we should stop separating that this person has a mental health issue and this person has a physical health issue. There is only one health, whether it is physical or mental. Here I would like to express deep appreciation to Minister Schillaci, who is one of our champions on violence against healthcare workers. Recently, I was in Turkey and I asked a young female doctor, why do you think, in that sense, that moment, it was in Turkey, it could be another country, it's so difficult now to attract doctors and nurses. And she was sharing her own experience as an emergency doctor. How many times she has been a victim herself in the emergency room as a medical doctor. Then how can we imagine even to attract our healthcare workers? We are now scaling up our collaboration with the World Federation of Primary Healthcare Doctors, also with FIGO, which is the International Organization of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, to make the healthcare workers aware of violence against women and girls and healthcare workers. Next one. We have finished for the first time, with support of the European Commission, a survey in 30 countries on the mental health of the healthcare workforce. We should care for the people who care for us. 1 out of 3 healthcare workers are facing signs and symptoms of anxiety and depression, and 1 out of 10 thoughts of passive suicide. This is really an alarming situation. Again, to address it, it does not mean necessarily a lot of money. Having shifts, having possibilities when women, because 70 to 80% of the workforce are women, that someone is taking care of their children, having a focal point on mental health in each facility that you know where to go through, are all very practical solutions which can alleviate this tough situation. And finally, we are scaling up our work on digital violence. It's very difficult nowadays to split reality between physical reality and digital. Many of our youth are basically living in digital reality. But we don't have the same guardrails, the same safety net like we have in physical life. If you drive by car, you have a safety belt. But if you throw your children on the digital internet, there are no safety belts. So this is definitely a very important point for attention. Now on WHO's role in the European region. Remember, European region is 53 member states, not just European Union, goes from Greenland to Vladivostok, Turkey, Israel, Central Asia. Unfortunately, we are confronted with quite a number of conflicts and wars. Here we have the same principle again as you religious leaders. It is to be politically neutral, evidence-based, and leaving no one behind. What I learned, my friends, is that many countries want to be neutral as long as you choose their side. But if you're neutral, you don't choose any side except the side of the vulnerable, the poor, the lonely person. It does not mean if we are assisting a particular country which is fighting, that we are legitimatizing the government. No, it means that we leave no one behind. Here I want to say a very big grazie mille, a warm thanks to the Italian authorities for the amazing work on medical evacuation of children with very severe disease, very severe wounds from Gaza, who otherwise would have no chance. More than 50% of the facilities are either damaged or destroyed, and specialized care is no longer available. If every country in the world would do like Italy, frankly speaking, the situation would be much, much better. At the same time, we are also assisting on mental health the women, the girls who have been massacred, butchered by Hamas 7 October. I have been there at the Nova site. These were terrible stories. And the children were forced to watch their mothers in agony. Again, we have to help the poor and vulnerable people everywhere. And I also would like to thank all countries present who opened not only their country, but their homes and their hearts for refugees from Ukraine, where we also still have a devastating conflict. Finally, a word on climate. What we see now, a new phenomenon, is called climate anxiety. That youth is also very concerned about what's happening. Recently, I was speaking to the Minister of Health of Iceland. In Iceland, for the first time in history, they have mosquitoes. They had never seen a mosquito over there in history due to the warming of the climate. I know in Italy also, right, you have vector-borne diseases are coming back. So this is something that we are taking seriously, and I have established a pan-European commission on climate change and health to produce very pragmatic recommendations, and the report will be launched Sunday, 17 May, at the eve of the World Health Assembly. WHO as a convening platform. Cardinal Zuppi this morning was telling that WHO is very important institution, but has to undergo necessary transformation. And I know this is the opinion of the Italian government, and indeed, and we have been very proactive on this in the WHO European region. Because you know, the big elephant in the room is that the United States of America has, or is leaving WHO, which paid quite contribution. So we had to restructure, but I want to assure you that WHO is not in retreat. I have never seen this as a cost-cutting exercise. I saw this as an opportunity, a painful opportunity, but an opportunity. Every crisis is an opportunity to rethink and reshape WHO through 3 streams of work. Number 1, back to the basics. Because it is true, WHO started to do a little bit of everything everywhere. We have to go back to the basics. Primary healthcare, immunization, infectious disease, which can create a pandemic. Number 1. Number 2, efficiency and accountability. We have to be accountable to our governors who are member states. It is a fake news, my friends, as if WHO would take national sovereignty. We don't have this mandate. Every country is sovereign. WHO is giving soft recommendations based on evidence. And it's up to the country to take it, to leave it, or to work with us. And we're also very proactive. Minister Schillaci was mentioning already artificial intelligence. Very, very proactive. I am AIing the whole bureaucracy of WHO, and it's amazing. We used to be infamous for our lengthy recruitment times. Now we are doing a number of days. But we are very well aware of the caveats. AI, in my view, will never replace human judgment, and for medical care, never replace empathy. Japan is also a country with a tremendous aging population. They have AI'd the whole society, but elderly people now complaining about the robots at home. Japan, very proactive robots, pet cat robots and dog robots and robots for karaoke, but people still feel lonely because this is too artificial. Dear friends, there is one thing I'm particularly proud of. It is of the second WHO European Programme of Work. What does it mean? It is the collective health agenda approved by all 53 ministers of health last year. What's the compass? The what? Why I am particularly proud of this? Because it shows that even in war times, in geopolitical tough times, health remains one of the last areas where even conflicting countries and parties can sit around the table and agree on a common agenda based on the values of equity, solidarity, and universality. I believe this is my last slide because I would like to listen to my colleague Chris Brown on the latest data. Collaboration in health is a remarkably resilient bridge, but WHO has to stay evidence-based, not to choose the side except the side of the patient. And I want to finish what was said in the famous beatitude from Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5:9, quote, "Blessed are the peacemakers. That's way, if we protect health, we protect peace," unquote. Grazie mille.
Grazie, dottor.
Thank you so much, Dr. Klug, for your talk. When at the beginning you said navigating turbulent times, you reminded me of something that Lucretius said. He said that happy is the man who looks at the sinking ship from far away. He's not joyful for the misfortune of others, but because he's safe. And if he said that back then, we can say that now we are safe. And now we can find solutions to these turbulent times, and such solutions probably stem from coming together. After World War II, many international bodies were created, and we believe that those could be a way to tackle conflicts and create peace. That is now turning out not to be true, but that does not mean that we no longer have to believe in those institutions. But we need to give even more credit to those institutions. So thank you so much for your work and for your words. Now we have the head of the Council of European Bishops' Conferences, who's joining us online, Archivilius in Vilnius, Monsignor Gruches. He should be connected, and we ask him to talk about the role of CCEE in meeting the needs of our neighbors today in Europe. They told me that Monsignor Gruches should be with us online. He followed the event till now.
Are you ready?
Hello, can you hear me?
Monsignor Gruches.
Thank you, Mr. Gruches, for being here. I will now leave you the floor. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, Mr. Minister, distinguished speakers and guests, sisters and brothers all. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm pleased to be here, albeit via video link, due to the unavoidable commitments here in Lithuania for this interesting and greatly needed initiative. Common reflection on today, who is my brother, in light of the presentation of the second WHO European Health Equity Status Report. This event, organized by the Italian Bishops' Conference, the World Health Organization, the Council of European Bishops' Conference, is one for which I thank all of those who have contributed to its success, as well as the Pontifical Lateran University, which is hosting us. A heartfelt thank you goes to the Holy Father, Leo XIV, for this morning's special audience. To him go our gratitude and our prayers. Among many ongoing activities and initiatives carried out by the CCEE in Europe, today's is the first dedicated specifically to pastoral health care. Not that such initiatives do not exist in Europe, or that work is not being done to assist the sick and care for those who suffer. However, this dimension of pastoral ministry has always been and had a national focus. The collaboration between Italian Bishops' Conference, National Office for Pastoral Health Care, and the CCEE Secretariat, along with exchanges with the WHO European Office, has given rise to this initiative and to the desire to make possible the establishment of a European network of pastoral health care that brings together the offices of national bishops' conferences and Catholic entities working in the socio-health sector. The presence at this meeting of as many as 24 delegates from the bishops' conferences in Europe who are engaged in studying health-related issues and pastoral care for the world of health encourages us to move forward in this direction and perhaps to establish a new section of the CCEE specifically for pastoral health care. Several among those present may be wondering what exactly the Council of the Bishops' Conference of Europe is and what role the CCEE may be. One of the first fruits of the Second Vatican Council was the meeting of bishops from all over Europe who shared their initiatives and began to realize the need to meet more frequently and in a more structured manner. They found inspiration and support in paragraph 5 of the conciliar decree on the pastoral office of bishops in the Church, Christus Dominus, which states wherever special circumstances require and with the approbation of the Apostolic See, bishops of many nations can establish a single conference. Communications between episcopal conferences and different nations should be especially encouraged in order to promote and safeguard the common good. The then Secretary General of the French Episcopal Conference, Monsignor Roger Echegaray, had a prophetic intuition. In a simple note dated the 4th of November 1965, he highlighted the many exchanges taking place in Europe and underlined the need emerging from discussions to seek pastoral collaboration among the bishops' conferences of Europe. From this note arose a series of meetings that led in 1971 to St. Paul VI's establishment of our council, the CCEE, structure of the Union of Bishops' Conferences of Europe, which works in a world that is moving towards greater unity to promote and protect the good of the Church. Today, CCEE is composed of 39 members, 33 bishops' conferences joined by archbishops of Luxembourg, of the Principality of Monaco, the Maronite Archbishop of Cyprus, the Bishop of Chisinau of Moldova, the Eparchy of Mukachevo in the Ukraine, and the Diocese of Tallinn in Estonia. Together, they represent the Catholic Church in 45 countries throughout the greater European continent. An expression of sincere and attentive closeness to the beloved European continent, the CCEE has, since its establishment, been a sign of the Church's concern for a changing world. Over these 55 years, we have seen great changes in Europe: political, social, cultural, demographic, and economic, as well as changes within the Church. But we have also observed the many challenges that the peoples of Europe must face today. Challenges of our times, such as the difficulty of dialogue, distrust in the encounter with others, and the dominant materialistic culture which puts pressure on Christian faith, on religion in general, and on human civilization itself. The Church's concern for Europe is born of her very nature and mission, wrote St. John Paul II in the Apostolic Exhortation Ecclesia in Europa. Down the centuries, the Church has been closely linked to our continent, so that Europe's spiritual faith gradually took shape thanks to the efforts of great missionaries, the witness of saints and martyrs, and the tireless efforts of monks and nuns, men and women religious and pastors. In this exhortation, one finds, of course, many of the battles the Church undertakes regarding the very nature and dignity of the human person, as well as the idea of Europe, of solidarity and of a Christian world rooted in the values of welcome, love, and neighbor, and support of the poor. Until the 24th of February in 2022, the date of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it was unthinkable that we would once again face a war in the heart of Europe. There was, in fact, a reasonable hope that the building of European institutions, together with those of the states that emerged from the dissolution of the Soviet Union, would have made it possible to avoid any conflict. It seemed that the European dream of Schuman, a community where all would have equal opportunities, thus erasing any possibility of conflict, was alive and growing European community, one that many aspire to join, embracing its values. Instead, we find ourselves facing a European dream that seems shattered. In the face of the war, countries responded with an incredible network of solidarity, bearing witness to the fact that human dignity is still regarded as an invaluable treasure. One might argue that such a response is an emergency reaction prompted by war and by political necessity in resisting military aggression. Yet we, the bishops of Europe, can say this is not the case. By experience, we know that this is the spirit of solidarity characteristic of Europe's people. We can strongly affirm that Europe lives and breathes the idea that every human being is made in the image of God, and therefore must be welcomed, protected, and helped. In this profound conviction lie the Christian roots of Europe. Christian values represent a necessary bridge for dialogue in a wounded continent, one that must first reconcile peoples with their history beyond geographical borders. Reconciliation and peace can arise only from recognizing one's neighbor as a brother to love, not an enemy to fight. The Church's contribution to rebuilding Europe from a Christian perspective also involves a rightful social and economic renewal, working together with peoples and governments of Europe toward a recovery that leaves no one behind. The first step towards a just renewal is investing in the family and in defense of human life. It is essential to care for younger generations who must be protagonists, not spectators of the recovery. To care for the most fragile members of society, for the poor and the migrants, for the sick and those who care for them, so that a dignified life may be offered to all. Not least, we must care for the environment around us, beginning with the deep ecological conversion to which Pope Francis calls us in Laudato Si. The parable of the Good Samaritan presented earlier this afternoon by biblical scholar Father Stefano Huaran, whom I sincerely thank for this lectio, is a call to be human, to feel the suffering of others, and to act concretely by taking care of them. To preach the gospel and to heal the sick is the mission of the entire Christian community. It is the legacy that Jesus entrusted to his disciples, the continuation of Christ's healing work. Proclaiming Jesus is the truest and most urgent response to today's many challenges. It is the best way to serve Europe and the world. We are aware that the gospel has generated civilization, culture, and beauty for 2,000 years, and that in the incarnate Word, the face of God, who is love, is fully revealed, and consequently, the face of human dignity. We believe in a Europe that is a family, united in solidarity and subsidiarity, respectful of diverse peoples, knowing that the gospel continues to be an inexhaustible contribution for building an earthly civitas that is not closed in on itself or imploding, but open beyond itself, with feet on the ground and eyes towards heaven. A place where, in response to God's question, "Where is your brother?" each person can respond saying, "I am my brother's keeper." Thank you very much for your attention.
Grazie, Monsignor Gruccias, per le sue parole. Abbiamo
Thank you, Mr. Gruccias, for your words. We really appreciated your speech, and thanks for your words. Thanks also for reminding us that the Council of the European Bishops' Conference stemmed from the Second Vatican Council, which is a beacon for every action for the Church. And we also thank you for taking a concrete attention, that of giving more attention to pastoral healthcare in Europe, and we hope that can be implemented. You also reminded us of the importance of human dignity, that is in the image of God, and you also mentioned a sentence, preach the gospel. That is a text that the Italian Bishops' Conference published 20 years ago in 2006, and that is a reference work for pastoral healthcare. So thanks a lot. Before that, Dr. Kluge provided us with a definition of who our neighbor is today, because he said several times that we shouldn't leave anyone behind. And that means their neighbor is everyone. But how can we change the ending of a story that seems to be challenging? This is why we ask that to Dr. Chris Brown, head of the WHO European Office for Investment for Health, based in Venice, especially focusing on economic policies for health rights and health equity. She has quite a challenging title, changing the ending of their story, building resilience, health resilience in every stage of a person's life. The second European report on health equity status. So, Dr. Brown, it will be our pleasure listening to you. Thank you so much.
A huge thanks to the Italian and the European Conference of Bishops, to the heads of organizations, Italian social health, nursing organizations. A few special thank yous to His Excellency Buturi, also to Massimo Angelelli for great support here, and for His Excellency Amarati. We would not be here today without their commitment, but there is another person in the room who I wouldn't be here without today, and that is to my director, Hans Kluge, for his vision and his commitment to health and social justice. It's nice to have numbers, but the numbers are here that I want to present to tell a story, to shine a light on who exactly is falling behind and why. And not just to say, these are the numbers, but what do we do about it? So to tell the story and to shine a spotlight on the solutions. So healthy life expectancy in the European region, 67.3 on average for a woman across the region, 64 for men. So we can see already there is a difference between men and women in living a healthy life free of illness. But across the 53 countries, we can see that there is a 9-year difference depending on where you live. If you're a woman, it's 9 years difference ranging from 62 to 71. And for men, it's even greater, 58 to 72. So we have both differences between men and women and between countries. Now, within countries, we see that there's a difference between those who are struggling every day to make ends meet, to live a decent life, and those who are living more secure lives. And we see it not just for healthy life expectancy and how long we live, but we see it for all the major health factors. Limiting illness, twice as high for men and women who are struggling compared to those living more secure lives. Twice as high mental health, again, between those who are struggling and those who are living more secure lives. And we see slightly more difference, 3 times as much for men, twice as much for women in terms of poor self-reported health. Now, these figures are important when we want to tackle inequalities, because it's no point waiting until people die. These figures tell us that people are not thriving in health and life, and we can do something to change them. And when we do, we will reduce the costs within the EU, which every year totals between 100 and 200 billion euros in terms of costs. So what's behind these trends? From our work, and some of you have heard of these before, but in our newest work we have found the same 5 factors that are driving differences in health. Inequalities in access to health care and its quality, poor quality housing and living in neighbourhoods that are not safe and that don't have good facilities or environments. Financial insecurity. I want to say something here. The most of Europeans who are living in poverty are working 2 or 3 jobs. In-work poverty is a massive problem in Europe. Also, we see that lack of trust in authorities, but between communities, and poor access and quality of learning is a major factor, as are working conditions that are excess hours, unsecure, not sure whether the job will be there next week, having to work excess hours without excess pay. And you can see from those scarf diagrams that at different stages in a person's life, each of those factors has a different weighting. Obviously, in the working years up to 64, working conditions, but you can see across all of that, both poverty and the issue around loneliness, social isolation, lack of trust are key. So I'd like to take just a quick scoot through the average life course in Europe. Even before children are 5, we see inequities. There's no reason for these, but children who grow up in houses that are poor, in families that are struggling, in areas that are deprived, are twice as likely to die, not to get to school. And girls and boys living in families who are struggling report higher levels of poor health, and that's boys and girls. And you can see that 26% of young girls report poor health compared to only 19% of their better off peers. And for boys, it's 18 compared to 11. And you can see from the under 5 mortality rate on that graph that it's consistent across the region, Central Asia, Western Asia, Southern Europe, Eastern Europe. So it can't just be to do with the economic conditions of a country. We've highlighted for today's dialogue the things that we know are driving those factors. We know that bullying in children is a major factor, and all children are experiencing bullying. But we can see that children who are struggling are more exposed to bullying, both girls and to boys. Participation in childhood education, that thing that prepares young people for life. Social interaction, readiness for learning, ability to build confidence and make decisions. Children from families who are struggling are 50% less likely to participate in childhood education. So they already arrive at school and learning with a disadvantage. And how can it be that in one of the richest regions in the world, with some of the G7 countries, that children are going to school hungry? How is that possible? But between 32 and 74% of poor children, girls and boys, go to school hungry today. How can you learn when you're hungry? Now we know that there's things that work. Here we can see that those poverty and disadvantage can be halved in all countries by social transfers for education, for healthcare, for learning, for civic activities. And we know that when health and social authorities work together with voluntary organizations, community groups, parents and schools, we can really see an impact on the life of children. Family generosity policies, as I've mentioned, but community-based affordable services, prenatal and early years care, parenting support programs for parents experiencing multiple challenges. That need of support and guidance is vital. Early years programs that include personal mastery, confidence, language, and health and life skills. And importantly, living in a safe, warm, secure house free of violence. These things together deliver an 8-fold return in investment on a child's life. The whole of society benefits. You would be very hard-pressed right now to find a return on investment on the stock market that gives these returns. When we start then to look at young people between 16 to 29, we found that we have never seen before the levels of illness that young people have in the last 10 years. So young people who are struggling, both young men and young women, are 2 times more likely to have an illness that limits their life. What that means is it prevents them participating in work, social and cultural activities, further increasing their social isolation. And these trends, in the last 10 years, we've seen that the more struggling youth have had a faster rate of illness reporting. What's driving that? Well, quite worryingly, 60% of young people across the whole of the region report low trust in others. And in some parts of our region, that reaches up to 91%, for example, in Central Asia, particularly around young women. We have between 4 and 58%, nearly half of young women not in education, training, or employment, and between 4 and 26% for young men. This means that they're not learning skills, they're not able to get on the ladder in life, further pushing up the risk of exclusion and poverty of those who are already struggling. And here we see again the unmet need for healthcare that we've been talking about. For young women who are struggling, 2 times 6 likely not to have their healthcare needs met, and similar for men. And we see that, again, in certain parts of the region, that's worse. So we see that in eastern parts of the region, whether you're a young man or a woman who are poor, you're unlikely to have healthcare needs met. But if we invest in the mental health of young people, if we make sure our service is appropriate and provided in places where young people meet, if we support young people into education and training and we remove the barriers to employment, we see that we get a 10% improvement in the health of young people, in their mental health and their well-being, and that leads to an increase in the number of young people in employment by 2.6% for young girls and 1.7% for men. And this is what our economists and our ministries of finance want. Because in an aging society, when we don't have young people participating in economic activity, the whole of society has a problem. In the working years, we can see that anxiety and depression disorders have increased. In fact, they have increased in 60% of countries across Europe. We can see that compared to the better-off counterparts, working women are 2.5 times more likely to report anxiety and depression disorders. But look at the figures for men, up to 5 times as much. And you can see this is the same in all parts of the region. So this is a phenomena around mental health that we need to tackle collectively within and across borders. The rising costs of mental health, this is in the EU, 136.3 billion a year estimated, early dropout of the labour market, reduced productivity and wages costs of 99.3 billion a year. And we see then losses in terms of pressure on public services as well in terms of additional costs. So health inequalities are not just an issue for those who are affected and for health, but also for the whole of society. In working years, Poor health is being driven by excess hours, excess working hours. So 37% of workers across Europe are working up to and more than 45 hours a week. It's higher in Eastern Europe for men and women, lower in Western Europe. However, those excess hours are often matched by dual caring responsibilities, working long hours, caring for young children, and caring for relatives. We see then that this has a spillover effect in terms of low level of trust and control over life, a lack of hope that things can change. That's 70% of the poorest workers in Eastern Europe report this, and it's 2 and 3 times higher for the rest of the region. And we see that poorer workers working excessive hours with low levels of control over life are also twice as likely not to be able to meet family and friends on a regular basis. So we see then that this social isolation is reinforced. And we have to say that government decisions do matter, because government spending as a percentage of GDP on wages and social protection has decreased in nearly a third of European countries. At the same time, out-of-pocket payments for health and social care have increased in almost half of the region. This has shifted the financial burden of healthcare onto households and has increased the number of men and women with unmet needs for healthcare, as you can see across the region. But here we can see that if we invest in health at work policies, occupational health services, making clinics available out of working hours, support through examples such as the men's head sheds in Ireland, which take services to people in the communities where they live, we get a reduction in health inequalities and improvement in health. And that leads to 29% increase in tax revenues, 30% reduction in benefit payments, and a 50% reduction in poverty rates, particularly for women going into later life. This is the last part of the presentation, and where we know that many in the room are facing. With an aging population, how well are older people living in society? Well, those who are entering later life poor are more likely to have 40% more illness that limits further their participation in activity. And we can see that there's a difference there between the best and the most secure, and between men and women, it's quite similar. 3 factors we identified as being key. Loneliness and social isolation, we've said a lot about this before, but 18.5% of poor older people are lonely and isolated, compared to only 5% of those who are better off. That means that in some cases, there's a 50% higher risk of stroke and dementia and early death for those older people. We know that unmet need for healthcare is critical, and again, it's higher in least affluent and in certain parts of the region. And we know that the number of older people who are struggling to afford daily necessities has increased in 2/5 of European countries in the last 10 years. There's something else that's come from this analysis. A home is where we feel safe. And we can see that older people who are struggling to make ends meet are 3 times more likely to be living in overcrowded, unsafe and unhealthy homes, increasing their risk of falls, of respiratory diseases, and of being isolated, because there is a stigma with this. What do we do? Well, actually, I have to say that Italy is really at the forefront here, adapting our primary healthcare services, working more in the community, combining social and health and community organizations together, tackling loneliness alongside clinical conditions. And in fact, Giorgio Banchieri is here in the room, and is leading a national initiative around promoting social prescribing and tackling loneliness. The President Federico, president of the Friuli Venezia Giulia region, has just launched a whole regional initiative on well-being supported by us. What we see when we introduce these initiatives is a 30% reduction in emergency hospitalization admissions, 80% increase in confidence in self-management, and a reduction in loneliness. I have to say something about this because this is super important for us today. Strong civil societies and participation in political and local decision-making is critical to people's sense of belonging, meaning, and having control over their life. And interestingly, it also improves their health and reduces inequalities. Last but second slide. Here's a summary. Can we achieve this in the lifetime of young people, older people today? Well, yes, we can. We were issued a challenge by politicians to say, we're committed, but can it be achieved in my mandate? So we said yes, actually. In a country of 80 million population, a 1% investment in health and social protection, good work policies, housing and community services would improve the lives of 300,000 people within 4 years. And again, you can see the benefits on the left. We'd be delighted to invite you to the launch of this report on the 9th of June. It's an online studio debate so that we have an inclusive, open process for as many people to join. Hans Kluger will chair the event. We have invited speakers, the President of Slovenia, the Health Advisor to the President of Moldova, Prime Minister of Norway, Minister of Health and Social Protection of Tajikistan, President of Wonka, family doctors, youth organizations, and I believe that we will also have senior representation from Italy. Basically, we're saying we don't have to accept this. We can change how their story ends. Thank you.
Grazie, dottoressa Brown. Certo,
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Of course, commenting the data you have presented is difficult and challenging. I think that the awareness of the data you have supplied us with is important. I was quite alarmed when I saw the children going hungry. Of course, we first need to feed them if we wish to obtain anything else. And often we don't respond. Though we have awareness, full awareness of this data, we don't respond adequately because our rationale is something else, something different. And thank you for this line of reasoning. And this data encourages us more to preempt issues. We all know this, but perhaps we don't still espouse the fact that to preempt healthcare issues lowers costs and is the solution for everybody. And then another comment, the expectation of life, 64.6 for men. I'm nearly 65, but I still have a great desire to carry on. Among the data we see, certainly what was highlighted is that of the issue of poverty. And when poverty is associated with mental health, it becomes a very crucial point. But for this, I need to ask for the support of the Council and to give the floor to Professor Alberto Siracusano, psychiatrist, the President of the Board of Governors of the healthcare trusts and the president of the Mental Health Forum for the Italian Bishops' Conference and the Italian Ministry of Health. So, vital poverty, inequality, and mental health. Over to you, Professor. Thank you, and I wish you a long life at this point. I would like to thank His Excellency Monsignor Baturi, Monsignor Angelelli, all authorities present. I think that at this time I will try to be a little bit more informal in my conversation because Chris has presented an array of data of deep interest, and I will therefore skip my own. But what I do offer you is a rationale. And this rationale starts, if it does start, It does start. Yes, it stems from this frame, which I will comment later. And I would like it to be present in your mind. There is the Good Samaritan. There is the person who is looked after and cared for scientifically, in this case, as Don Stefano reminded us. And there is an animal and an environment. I will speak about this later, but bear in mind this image and this context. Inequality and vulnerability, these are the domains of equity, and there are great chapters we should talk about, but Chris has already mentioned this, and what Dr. Kluge said is still fresh in our minds. According to a gradient, any socio-economical status indicator in education, income, and social position and position of work, to everyone a worse situation of health corresponds. So this is a basic concept. So it means that the higher our status, the better our health care. And this is a point of reference. Vulnerability in economic terms is connected with social vulnerability. So the concept that I start from is that we're talking about inequality, general chapter, and I will take an overview of this, a bird's eye view of this, but inequality brings vulnerability, and vulnerability brings disease. So we need to understand this journey, and we need to try to intervene, and this is where I show you what we're going to be doing. Social determinants of social equity and structural determinants, as well as other things you already know about, but as you see, conflicts and war, somebody mentioned this earlier, are all conditions provoking inequality, and therefore, in one way or another, they provoke vulnerability. Inequality in terms of gender and migrants as a risk factor. These are another whole host of chapters that we have data available for. Gender inequality is what the WHO indicates as one of the strongest inequalities today that we need to deal with. So on the one hand, if we think about the evolutionary age of children today, we need to think that we live in a society where inequality is manifest in many forms. And inequality, I repeat, means understanding vulnerabilities. Migrants, another issue. I'm just going to quote it in passing because our society is now a society made up of migrants, and we need to bear in mind how these inequalities play out and where the vulnerability comes about. Here we see something very clear in the United States. We have great inequality. There we have enormous mental health issues. In Italy, all in all, we are not too badly off. Once again, the concept is inequality equals vulnerability. Vulnerability, in our case, means mental health here. All studies indicate that socioeconomic factors, also including family provenance, represent the main determinant in terms of correlation with disability levels. Why am I insisting on this point? Because the majority of papers creates quantitative correlations, as our chairman said earlier, and as has been reminded more than once, economic poverty is an inequality and makes it become a vulnerability. It is clear that this is true, but what we wish to show is how at a time where there is a certain kind of poverty, a range of other things happen. And here we see how neurological development in the brain may have an impact in terms of the prefrontal cortex thickness, where there is an economic inequality. Children grow up differently, they develop differently. This is a study that we did a few years ago on 1,400 students in the secondary schools and high schools, and what we noticed is a deep correlation between the economic possibilities, quantitative, and the presence of psychopathologies at the socio-economic level creates an issue of access to care. This is a bit of fun here, so I added it here, meaning that your postcode is a better predictor of health than a genetic code in a series of pathologies which will then take place. Poverty as a main factor of vulnerability. The link between poverty and mental health is bidirectional. Poverty in Italy is an aspect today which is very much underlined from a statistical point of view. 2 million families live in abject poverty, and then there is relative poverty. We are moving close to the kernel of my conversation here. One of the indices of vulnerability is educational poverty. Ms. Brown told us earlier that the presence of NEETs, those who are not in any kind of circuit of study, and our minister mentioned it as well, is today not only a vulnerability, but the sign of a disquiet and a pathology which is more and more widespread. This is showing how our conversation goes from inequality to vulnerability. So if we need to rethink social policies, we need to think about vulnerability as well as inequality. This means that in our case, we have undertaken a national plan for health, mental health and well-being. Our plan, as Minister Schillaci said, it pertains to a series of topics going from wellness to prevention and care, to mental health in adolescence and the evolutionary age and the update of services, mental health in risk management, in prisons, in social and healthcare integration, and in research. These are all objectives, and I believe we are the first in Europe to have produced a document of this kind. But basically, what is important, apart from what we see in all chapters, it is what has inspired this action plan. These are the principles, the indicators of vulnerability. One, mental health is one of these. It's a paradigm we journey from, and it's one where we begin to return to the original image. We once again recall to memory the picture of the Good Samaritan. So we have three domains: the human, the animal, the environmental. They mingle together and they represent an element of health, in our case of mental health. If you see up above to the left, I can't see it, but top left, there are the social determinants. These are the ones we said earlier, which are a source of inequality and vulnerability. This is a point we insist upon a lot in our plan, which is that of the health genesis. That means the perinatal environment. By this, we mean pregnancy, the mother, the father, the family, the context, thinking that when the future mother is expecting a child, they're not just expecting their child, but they're expecting somebody's grandchild and the son or daughter of that grandchild. We need to think in terms of a different range of paradigms, and one of this is salutogenesis, health genesis. It's not as easy to explain this, and with this chairman, I never have enough time to expound my thoughts. I'm sorry, I was joking, because he have often cut me short. The issue of salutogenesis, why is this crucial? It's not just because it's about prevention, but it means to think not in terms of pathogenesis, but something which needs to make us veer towards health. And this is where we take a further step. As you see, at the center is this sense of coherence, and especially two concepts which are intertwined with what we're talking about: resilience, and as you will see, there is another one called empathy. But what is a sense of coherence? Well, again, I won't dwell on this for long, but at a time where we speak about new paradigms, we have to broaden our field of investigation. Sense of coherence pertains to three main areas: understanding, so sense of comprehensibility, giving a meaning. Then to be able to act, a sense of manageability, and finally to attribute significance pertaining to the meaning of life, sense of meaningfulness. It seems a little abstract, but if we link this up with what we said earlier, youth, loneliness, those illnesses which come about when we undergo times of difficulty and vulnerability, then we understand that pathogenesis or salutogenesis means to work on a range of emotional aspects of our life, and in this case, of the life of our youth. The meaning of life is one of the most important factors in the context of mental health. Meaning that if we don't think that once we set up a plan for mental well-being, and if we don't start from a principle which, thinking of our youth and thinking of life in its various stages of its cycle, if we make a plan, I was saying, where the meaning of life is lost or is without important significance, that's where pathologies will come about. So these are explanations I won't dwell on. Determinants of mental health. This is another aspect which we included in where we started with the PASMA, the action plan, the early determinants for mental health. This is another central aspect. However, here is something fundamental for our project. And we talked about one mental health, and it is the issue where we don't know that the sense of unease or restlessness is a pathology already or not. And this sense of inadequacy is not very clear, because they seem to be the same ingredients that then create the disorder. When I speak about salutogenesis, I say that we need to intervene on these determinants, and if we're not able to recover a sense of coherence of life for our youth, again, I'm going to use them as an excuse, we are not preventing and we are not working on the unrest which then generates the disorder. So we need to start from basics and give values which pertain to the meaning of life. One of the things which has the greatest impact is vital poverty. Vital poverty is something we have spoken about for a few years now with Don Massimo, because this is important, because if the data of economic aspects are very, very clear, vital poverty is something a little more cumbersome to understand, because it regards the fact that it's difficult to realize that we often live in a society which is imbued with the emptiness of feeling the loss of moral and religious meaning and avoiding of significance and aim. And this means vital poverty. And it's what we said. If we don't develop the first portion of our conversation in our concepts, in our new concepts, or those recovered paradigms, then we will be unable to undertake a project of care. This is a further step. These are researches which we have carried out. I won't be presenting all of them in order not to take away too much time, but what is important is what is in the middle, and it says vital poverty, psychopathological correlates. Vital poverty is present both in the situations where there is economic poverty and in those where this economic poverty is missing. So it is disconnected from the quantitative index. And once we undertake a range of studies, we see that vital poverty correlates. Where there is high vital poverty, we have a low sense of empathy, and we also have a low capacity for resilience, which means that the phenomenon of bullying, quoted earlier, has its own root, and this main root lies in vital poverty, because bullying is not a quality only of situations where there is social and economic poverty, but it exists even in high social and economic ability and capacity. So this conversation is important. Also, it correlates with psychopathology. And I will go back on this later. And the same applies to impulsiveness. So this is about resilience, and it shows and proves how vital poverty is a factor that has a negative effect on resilience. This means that if it acts on impulsivity, it means the person can control him or herself much less. And we see in many affective and emotion-based relations, especially with young people, we immediately move on to forms of violence because this vital poverty is there. Here is our study, but I will skip swiftly to the very last slide. I think it's this one. There is no diagnostic prevalence. This means that the depressed are not poorer from a vital point of view than bipolar or schizophrenic patients. Vital poverty has its own set of qualities which today we could call an agnostic in nature. It is a presence which is negative in any form of negativity of mental health. And somehow, through these researches, we have been able to prove it. What is interesting is that the sample we considered are all young people who have committed some crime, and this gives greater value to the conversation we are holding. Vital poverty is, once it excludes the relationship with the pathology, it has that agnostic value which is present where a whole range of situations of malaise and of disorder exist. Moving on, and here too I won't dwell on this, but vital poverty is presented in other forms as well. Some of these refer to some crucial dimensions, which are disaffiliation and the loss of center, and these are determining for solitude. So if there is an association between these two aspects, psychopathology situations come about, which is disaffiliation. This is the progressive breakdown of social ties, of those that relationship of networks of primary integration, family, and a system of interdependence based on community belonging, which through mobilization of available resources tend to assure its own balance and the balance of those who belong to it, i.e., the problem is that we have a disaffiliation. The example is Okikomori. The fact that they are lost, they lose the sense of integration, and this has been studied. This is the Italian National Institute for Statistics data, and it shows it very clearly what vital poverty means. Vulnerability. Vital poverty is the foundation of many psychopathologies. Vulnerability of disaffiliation is another form, which is an index of vulnerability, and this is what we should work on in order to be able to create those groups, those situations, those other spaces, other places which avoid disaffiliation. Once again, the loss of center. This is a wonderful term, and it means an anguish of loss of sense. And I think that if I read this, I think many will recognize this. In anguish, we feel that we are lost and bewildered. This is where we express, first of all, that classic indeterminateness where every being is in anguish. And Chris said earlier that any anxiety disorder is something which is extremely present, but if we only look at it as a category, it does help us. But if we penetrate within and we begin to think in terms of bewildered anguish, then we will understand more. Eco anxiety, for example, those disorders coming from climate change or the uncertainty that this provokes. There are studies clearly showing how the reduction of births is linked to eco anxiety and to climate uncertainty. Not only, of course, but it does play a role. Well, this anguish, this bewildered anguish, is something we need to intervene on as an index of vulnerability, and therefore we need to develop their salutogenesis, health genesis. Very well. This is an image which was the Jubilee of Mental Health in this very hall, where we see Cardinal Zuppi who is speaking at this time. What does he say? He tells us this: a dramatic increase of vital poverty, which is that group, that cluster of factors which are not only economic but also social and cultural, and bring to a dwindling of what is essential in relationship. Vital poverty generates mental illness. This is a way to underline this concept once again. Here we are. These are my last slides, and I believe my timekeeping is impeccable. I was hoping for this perfect by Cervellera. I needed it. So, the Good Samaritan. This is the painting, clearly. I'm not a biblical scholar nor an art critic. I'm just using it as a psychopathologist. What do we see? We see what we said earlier, this one mental health. All the ingredients are here. But what is interesting is that vital poverty is also present. Where is it? It's behind the donkey. And he is walking away uninterested as to what's going on around. And I believe that this is important in order to highlight how sometimes iconography and our stories enable us to understand that there are a range of things that, even though they have been said and written many, many years ago, we need to bear in mind and we need to make an effort to understand them. At least this is the way I see it, so much so that rereading the Gospel of Luke, I will give you two considerations as a psychiatrist and a psychopathologist. This is an image of those many images which we can use in order to represent the Good Samaritan. Empathy of proximity. What does this mean? The pathos of the encounter in a relationship of care. Look after him, and anything you will spend in excess, I will pay you back on my return. Somebody mentioned this. What's he talking in? What's the Samaritan talking about? About a DRG, sort of a, he's saying, don't worry, I'll pay, an IOU. But he says two things. But he says that he needs to pay for this, but it also means that money is important. Investments are important. Caring for in the field of healthcare requires investments, and adequate ones at that, and often this is not the case. One more thing is what we learn. The neighbor who is superlatively proximate, close. Proximus is a Latin superlative. I found this out. I read this somewhere. So I read it from by philosopher Cacciari, and the superlatively proximus is a great beauty. Is not the next guy, but the one who I move close to. He or she could be the farthest, the furthest, and this is one of the principles of taking care. At that time, an expert of the law got up to put Jesus to the test, and he said, Master, what should I do in order to deserve eternal life? And Jesus said, what is written in the law? What do you read? And this is the idea of the mandate, mandatum novum, but I won't dwell on this. But the answer is, you will love the Lord your God. And as a psychopathologist, I highlight this with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind. And I'd never thought about this, because he says soul, but he also says mind. I will ask Don Stefano to explain this to me. And not only, he adds the heart and strength. So it's not just a few words thrown in, each one is weighted. And imagining the field of a relationship of care, I think this can be called empathy of proximity. But as well as this, and I have copied Monsignor Baturi a little here, so perhaps I didn't copy that well. I wanted to ask him beforehand. I might not have done it properly, but I didn't have time to ask him. Anyway, there is another form of empathy. Let's go and look for other paintings. And we seem to have skipped one, which is the one where the ass carrying the wounded man, which Don Stefano mentioned. So these are Delacroix, Rembrandt, and von Joachim, just to simplify, because I can't pronounce his middle name. What is interesting, however, is this one. Even if this is true, we have Delacroix, which is the one on the right, and on the left is Van Gogh. What is said here is that he paints this. This is one of his last paintings before he dies. That means dying through probably self-suppression. And this is an enormous painting. It's not a proximity empathy, meaning that the Good Samaritan doesn't just kneel down to help, but he elevates the wounded man. He elevates him. And if you see, Van Gogh chooses colors which are the highest example of empathy between two persons, because the pantaloons is the same blue of the shroud of the wounded man. So there is a correspondence here, and this form, vital poverty, is present. Bottom left, somebody walking away. But the interesting part is that this is a Levite, whereas he's a Samaritan, meaning somebody from Samaria. And this is contact empathy, that of shouldering the load, if I understand, to take charge, meaning to carry, to physically carrying. It means that he takes charge in all ways. So he picks up, he raises, and often the greatest effort in the relationship of care is not so much to pick up a person physically, but to take on their affective and emotional load. To elevate, to pick up, to raise has various shades of meaning. That of elevating a spirit, which I have been abated through support and encouraging, and also means a physical action linked to a religious act, and to elevate includes the invitation of the priest Sum Sum Corde to lift up our hearts in a sign of respect and the importance of supporting the most weak. And there is a link between what we do or we think we're doing and the psychotherapeutic relationship of care. It is the empathy of contact. I will ask Monsignor Baturi to explain this better, because St. John Chrysostom, as I said, I just went quickly. I did not know him in depth. Very well. We can close here with these words, which are the words of Pope Leo. Francis writes that the Good Samaritan is the vocation of us as citizens of our country and of the entire world, the builders of a new social tie. So to build healthcare, means to bear in mind good healthcare, good mental health, and it means to start to stem from those principles we believe that are the foundation of every action. The fact that we understand, perhaps today even more, the meaning and the significance of a care, of taking care of, and of an outlook of life, not only for our chairman, who we hope will live many a year, but also for our youth. Thank you.
Grazie, Professor Siracusano.
Thank you, Professor Siracusano. Unfortunately, I have no time to comment on your talk, but as you said, this was a fire test to me. The event on the 3rd of April, where I had to moderate 48 speakers in a single day, including several politicians. So you will certainly remember the struggle it was, especially for the context. I will only underline one aspect. You shed the light on many of those that connects science and pastoral healthcare, and that is the meaning of life. That is something that we have in common, and then I want to underline. And what can the Catholic Church do in this complex scenario? And we thank the Italian Bishops' Conference for seeking, organizing, and supporting today's event. And now I will ask His Excellency Monsignor Giuseppe Baturi, Secretary General of the Italian Bishops' Conference, to take the floor, and he's also the Archbishop of Cagliari. So the role of the Catholic Church and church bodies in preventing health-related poverty. Thank you so much. I will try to be short, to keep it short, because we do not have much time, and I'm about to turn 62. So I'm starting to also make some economy of time. I truly thank the Italian Bishops' Conference and the Director of the Pastoral Healthcare Office, Massimo Angelelli, the Council of European Bishops Conferences, President Gruchas, and the Secretary, Don Antonio Milati, who's here. And I'd like to go back to what John Chrysostom was saying. The doctor who doesn't take on the sickness cannot treat it, and those who are not sick with the people they are caring for cannot give them health. And the two colors also mean that touching the weaknesses of others is also touching our own weaknesses, and our hope, the hope that we can give to others, is the hope that we can give ourselves. Another genius of Christianity, Saint Augustine, in the Year of Mercy said, asked himself, what is mercy? Well, it is taking others' misery in our heart. So mercy is both mercy in our heart, so taking up the misery of others is the root of mercy. The word for mercy was created from the pain for misery. There are both words in that, misery and heart. And when the heart is touched by other people's miseries, well, that is mercy. And I could stop here. But unfortunately, conventions force me to keep on talking. Pope Francis said that that is part of the mission of the Church, as it was for Jesus, that passed in the world by touching those who were sick, asking them questions, and also I remember a girl with serious health issues who received from her psychiatrist the same question that she had from Jesus. Do you want to heal? And that it was Jesus' question. And Benedict XVI used to say that the mission of the Church is to preach the gospel, sanctify people with and share charity. And the pastoral health care integrates all these dimensions, because we need to preach the gospel to the sick. Also with prayers, we want that to be a condition that is not an obstacle to sanctity, and sharing charity to everyone. And as we are at the end of the day, I want to sum up. All the bishop conferences have a pastoral healthcare office with different structures, and I will try to organize my answer to that question in 4 points. First, what does the Catholic Church do on the issue of health? We listen to the parable ending with do likewise. Take care of others and do likewise. So what does the Catholic Church do? Well, it tries to do so. Go and do likewise. And from its early age, the Church practiced mercy, acts as an expression, but also as food for love, for life, of every person in their unique character. So these ethos of taking care in the wounds of others, both in the body and in their quest for meaning. And Christian charity had several charity institutions to support those suffering, like hospitals, hospices, for the poor. And in Italy, we have 1,770 Catholic healthcare structures, Catholic universities, scientific research institutes, over 150,000 workers operating in this global care of people. Then we have charities where doctors and nurses And nurses are precisely those who take on the burden of the suffering of others. And religious people who give testimony of a gospel of proximity and care. This final aspect is especially relevant because that is precisely the go and do likewise. The Church always understood that as an invitation to the individual, but also to the community, acting and organizing instruments to create networks and welcome people who are in need, and is not afraid of the institutional aspect of the charisma. As Benedict XVI said, a real service of charity needs an institutional expression, because institutions ensure duration over time, coordination among various people, and a stability against individual feelings that otherwise would make tackling such topics impossible. Therefore, Christianity has never had any challenge in expressing through complex institutions a mandate of love for the individual. But the person is a community that is created, and in this activity there's also the need for training, the capacity for efficiency and efficacy, but also training and education of the heart, as Benedict XVI said, because charity is a heart that sees and feels the other. It is a commitment from the Church toward an humanization of all therapeutic processes, and also the affirmation of the rights. For instance, let's just think of the issue of universal health coverage that has a very important ethical dimension. Another example of healthcare response are hospices, which address health poverty when earthly life achieves its natural ending. And this is an important example. I will probably say a few words later. And that community related dimension also ensured innovation stemming from empathy, from sympathy, because when we take on the burden of others as if they were our mothers or brothers, we can invent new solutions. And institutions and solutions change as the needs change. This creativity defines the soul, the spirit of a heart that sees and takes on the misery of others. Now we have 26 hospices in Italy, 26 Catholic hospices. It is one of the forms of healthcare support. Then we have several other units over our territories, and this makes us understand that others, the sick, are our neighbors, but my duty is becoming neighbor to others and being present where they are. This is one of the main traits of churches, of the capillarity of the expressions of the church, being present where people actually live. I was telling Don Massimo that in the kingdom of two Sicilies in the mid-19th century, they invented parish pharmacies, because only the priests could get into the families, understand their needs, and organize a series of support initiatives that were related to their real needs, to the real needs of the people who lived there, together with their families. This was my second point. But also in the field of healthcare, the effectiveness and effective testimony of our action depends from the creation of a collective us. It is true that throughout history there were several experiences, different experiences of diversity due to different charismas, institutions, cultures, territories, and therefore a commitment that we feel as our own, instead of bringing together, of coordinating, of gathering. without neglecting differences, but rather by creating the entire Christian community in the people where it lives as a single community, as a single family. Before Christianity, charity was given and was only relegated to some generous families or kingdoms. It was Christianity that invented community charity. And do you know what the connection point was? Well, it was the Holy Mass, because the money gathered there was then given to the priest, who then had to set up an assistance that was no longer private, but expressed the need of an entire community in such a variety and diversification of institutions, of culture, of places. And the Church aims at facilitating collaboration of all those who are inspired by the action of the Lord, also to ensure in such a way, by including diocesan, that pastoral healthcare is not relegated to hospitals, but can truly achieve families, communities, and territories, precisely where people live and where the Church sets its tent. The creation of that working group on mental health within the Italian Bishops' Conference and its Office for Pastoral Healthcare, with different experts and professors, created and provided new evidence to this call for bringing together to tackle problems that overcome the capacity of individuals, not just in terms of professional capacity, but also for the complexity of problems. Therefore, more perspectives are needed. More capacities need to be brought together for an appropriate discernment to identify trustworthy solutions. A third theme in Dilexite, Poplio wrote something that is extraordinary in my opinion. He said that in addition to concrete commitment for the poor, we need to associate a change in our mentality that can impact on our culture. And that means that real action has an impact only if it creates a shift in our mindset. And that is the meaning of our event today. Therefore, in addition to our concrete actions for the poor, for the sick, we also need to associate cultural actions that have an impact, that affect the basic meanings that we have in our mindsets, to promote a culture of life, because all lives and the lives of everyone is worth being lived. There are no exceptions. You may remember some books from the early 20th century. There are no lives that are not worth living, and there are no fragments of life that are not worth being lived. Otherwise, that will be detrimental to our democracy and our very social fabric. This protection for life is also the capacity for discernment and to identify a concept of healthcare that is separated from a psychophysical integrity, that also encompasses our spiritual and affective and environmental aspects. And being among our family members, having a hug or a kiss is not the same as not having those. It is part of our well-being. And the Italian Constitutional Court has widened its meaning for health to encompass those aspects of proximity of our dearest one. Third aspect, the culture of care. Based on one of the potential etymologies, the word care has its root in the word observing, in the term for observing. And the Good Samaritan sees. The others had seen as well, but they went away, whereas he stops by and compassion starts. So prompting this culture of care means helping everyone to see, to feel the anxiety, the uneasiness of people, especially the young, against the temptation of not wanting to see, to hear, and to grasp the needs. Negligence, indifference is the opposite of care. The desire to avoid seeing and stopping by. So this, the fact of taking on the burden is what gives meaning to life of those who feel this compassion. Because if we do not express this mercy towards those who are in need, our life will be poorer. And it is the life of the individual, because we will present to our Lord with our own life. And then another cultural field, that of our lifestyles. We just mentioned in the two previous talks these aspects. There are lifestyles that can have a higher impact on on illness, on diseases. Now let's move to the fourth point, while I'm about to conclude, so you can start packing your bags. Fourth item, fourth theme, this is just a joke. Perhaps the Good Samaritan became a politician, a minister perhaps, and he said, well, could that money be de-taxed? Could I create some kind of support structure? Can I create a crime for omitting help? Real love is politics, because it is an attempt to create society, to make people feel better, and we should not be afraid of working on that level, where the example of the Good Samaritan can represent a role model for a new social organization, where, for instance, in addition to what we already said on protecting life or organizing healthcare for everyone by facilitating access, but this is something that you all said, we could facilitate pluralism of institutional expressions, because being neighbor to others means that others need to perceive us as neighbors in terms of religious beliefs, of culture. We shouldn't be afraid of having this plurality, where true solidarity can actually be achieved by facilitating community participation in organizing the common good. Associations, churches, local institutions should do that, and I'm convinced of that. And then we should give a voice, we should speak up for those who do not have a voice, because churches should say what is not right, what is not fair. It is not that some behaviors are not fair, that some inequalities are not fair or not just. It is not acceptable that our zip code impacts our quality of life. But while the church says that, it should also pave the way and lay the foundations and conditions for a real change. And I will move to the conclusion by saying that it is a real commitment. And as the Pope said earlier today, health cannot be a luxury for the few, but it is an essential condition for social peace. We need to understand how we can move on now. We were called and gathered here today. We shared experiences and studies, and what now? We need to keep on, to bring on our knowledge. We have to understand and decide together to understand current processing, and perhaps we need to be available to bring together common actions. The final word is for suffering people. We should not consider that only as the recipient of our action, instead, rather than the protagonist of its new birth. Thank you. Thank you, Monsignor Baturi, for these 4 perspectives that you offered to us. And your final joke was not actually a joke. Opens to the future. Now we have a final section in our agenda, and it will last for only 30 seconds. That is a look at the future, but there's no speaker. It is not a mistake. We wanted to leave that open because each and every one of you will give its individual answer. What can we do starting from tomorrow as people, as individual, and as institutions, as organizations? So I will leave you some space to answer this, and I will seize the chance to greet you all. There's a time to greet everyone with their titles, with their qualifications, and then there's a time to acknowledge each other simply as people. So I will take the chance of having a Franciscan here to remind you that perhaps Francis would have wished peace and good to us all on this occasion.